Hello everyone and welcome back to Always Watching. Today we are discussing the new documentary I'm Tim. Briefly, the documentary chronicles the life and career of Tim Bergling, popularly known as Avicii. The film compiles years of footage from his childhood as well as his career and interviews colleagues and his parents in order to paint a picture of who this man was, as well as the devastating effects of fame and fortune. It is entirely narrated by Avicii, which makes it a very uniquely emotional experience. Personally, Avicii's music has had a profound effect on my life. It triggers all kinds of memories and feelings, and to this day I feel like whenever I hear his songs, it's as if I'm listening to it for the first time. For a lot of people, his music marked important milestones or just happy moments, and so his death just came as a shocking and devastating surprise. I think the intimacy of this documentary, especially having it narrated by Avicii, really allows fans and audiences to reconnect with his music. The documentary is pretty extensive. It starts off in his childhood, and we're introduced to a young man whose only dream is to have a creative job when he grows up. He was always interested in music, but he felt very insecure because traditional musicians often play instruments and I guess can direct orchestras. And Tim comes from that early era before Spotify, before Apple Music, before EDM was really a thing. I mean, it existed in this gray space, so it wasn't really well respected enough for people to really know what to make of it. In addition, because he was composing from a laptop, it was really difficult at the time to appreciate the enormity of his talent. And DJs have always been around, however, they have never been the center of attention. And when you think about it, how many famous songwriters or producers do you know? Many of us could not even identify one if they walked right past us. He was part of this new wave of DJs that were actually way more famous than the artists on their tracks. One of my favorite aspects of the documentary is that it interviews artists he worked with on some of his most iconic tracks. So it does feel like we're watching history in the making because now we know how impactful those songs were. Throughout the documentary, he states that his goal was always to make timeless music. To make timeless music, of course, you have to be very vulnerable and open. Really crazy to think, like watching the documentary, some of his biggest hits, like Hey Brother or Wake Me Up, were not even well received when they first came out. One of the most we live in an alternate universe moments of the documentary is when he's performing these hits for the first time in Miami, and he's literally just booed off the stage. Up until this point, his only massive hit was Levels, and once you hear it, you'll know exactly what song I'm talking about. It's so recognizable. And so he kind of has this enormous success at the start of his career, and people were hoping that he would just kind of replicate the same energy. Instead, he goes in a completely different direction. And it took a while for people to really appreciate how awesome and amazing these songs are, which is insane considering how we listen to them today. The funniest parts, like when I think about, for example, Hey Brother, like I'm automatically triggered, like, hey brother, do you still believe in one another? And the audience was literally booing. They're like, we don't want to hear this, brother. Like, you need to get off the stage. And even listening to the artist describe it was very funny because they're like, I was really trying to do my thing, but people just really didn't like it. Each artist was a bit nervous because he was selecting artists that were a bit outside of the genre, and so they also didn't know what to do. Like when you think about a song like Wake Me Up, it's hard to think that wasn't well received. Like, wake me up when it's all over, when I'm wiser and I'm older, and people were like, boo, get off the stage. Like, it's just kind of crazy to think. And one of the producers was saying how he really believed that this was going to be a massive moment, and so he placed himself in the middle of the crowd, and he couldn't believe the boos. And the reaction from this Miami audience at this massive festival, it had them second guessing, like, am I tripping? Is this really as good as we think it is? Like, they didn't really know what to make of it. Like, imagine watching the moonwalk for the first time, like watching Michael Jackson moonwalk and not really recognizing that it's great. Like, that's kind of the enormity of the situation. And I just can't imagine being that one person in Miami at that time who was like, you know what, I get it. That was a great show. But the problem is, like the reaction to this Miami show was so horrible that they literally uploaded this music on SoundCloud. And I can't imagine just waking up one day and just hearing that on SoundCloud. And thankfully, over time, people really reacted well to it. And it's kind of crazy because if you've seen the Kanye documentary on Netflix, there's one moment where he's pitching All Falls Down, like the All Falls Down, like the iconic All Falls Down, to these record executives. And they're just not really seeing the vision. They're not really getting it. And it's one of those situations where it's like, if you get it, you get it. You don't, you don't. And you know eventually they will. But at that time, it's quite devastating. I think part of Avicii's struggle was trying to remain creative in an industry that just wants fast money. They want him to recreate the same moments again and again and again because it's a sure thing. And he just took it in a direction that no one really knew what to do with. I think a part of the struggle of being an artist is you want to please everyone, you want to make everyone happy, but at the same time, you don't really want to lose your own voice. And this is exactly what started happening to Avicii. The most interesting conversations in this documentary is regarding the division between Tim and Avicii. Every artist has an alternate ego, like that's not unusual or strange. However, for Avicii, he just found that the only way he can kind of maintain his sanity is to merge them into one. And I think even listening to his last album, he became such a master of expressing himself. I mean, these were not only great tracks in terms of production, in terms of, you know, everything. It was just somehow they were able to just connect and hit with the audience in a way that just was just, it's hard to describe because again, when I listen to his songs, it feels like he knows me, you know, it feels like he's speaking to some type of universal pain or some type of experience. And in order to do that, you really have to open up your heart. I think with music, it's really interesting because sometimes you get these really well-produced albums, but they feel a bit heartless. In his case, it's like they're well-produced and they're just so emotional. Watching this documentary and hearing him speak, this is really significant. You get the sense that he was a man who was always in crisis in terms of finding his purpose, what is the meaning of life. And I suspect that fame and fortune made these anxieties a lot worse. After I watched this documentary, I went back to his latest album, and there's two songs on there that I remember I was always playing, SOS in particular. And of course, this song hits a lot different, knowing how his life ended. Like, can you hear me, SOS? Help me put my mind to rest. Sorry, I'm not a singer, but if you look at the lyrics of these songs, you really, especially in comparison to how he was acting prior to traveling, it's almost as if this man was screaming for help in plain sight. During the making of his last album, people were noting how upbeat he was and how happy he was and how full of life he was. And so they didn't really notice anything. This was such a stark contrast to his earlier albums where he was really suffering with alcoholism and he was incredibly depressed and he just couldn't really bring himself to do anything. And the toll, especially early on when he was really getting hit after hit after hit, he notes that his body he was losing stamina, he was losing inspiration, and he just kind of wanted to quit. It just wasn't giving him the feeling that he expected, and this was really causing him a lot of pain. And no matter how many records he made, no matter how many shows he sold out, something just wasn't clicking. And I love the conversation about this journey to kind of figure out what's wrong. He tried to work out, he tried to meditate. He's trying to identify what exactly is wrong. But it goes so deep. The lines that really struck out at me in this documentary is when he says, don't underestimate staying true to yourself. And his goal, he keeps saying it in the documentary over and over again, is just to be content. He would love to just reach this like equilibrium in his life. I don't think, given the type of person that he was, like this empath, he was really cut out for the musical industrial complex. Like, this is a very aggressive industry. And there's always this pressure to become more successful, to do better, to collaborate with bigger artists. And even though he was able to resist, it still took a massive toll on him. I think when it comes to fame, you really don't know how you will react to it until you become famous. Like, there are people who become famous and they're addicted to it. Like, they want more, 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 more. And there are other people who become famous and you get the sense that they just want to disappear. Like, this is just not what they signed up for. Listening to him speak, I mean, he was very aware of the impact fame was having on him, this pressure was having on him, but it's almost like all he could do is watch. Like, there's really nothing he could do to stop it. Like, he tries, but it almost snowballs out of his control. One thing I really loved about this documentary, again, is the vulnerability and the way he talks about wanting to find happiness. And happiness comes from within. This is an internal struggle. And he says that, his idea of happiness was not his own. Throughout his career, he really doubled down. He managed to outdo himself every single time. However, he still just could not find peace. And I think when your passion becomes your career, it's very hard to draw that line between the professional and the personal. Career-wise, he was incredibly successful. He was thriving. He was doing really well. And the problem is he just almost didn't know what to do with himself. And I think he wanted so badly for the stability in his professional life to mirror the stability in his personal life, but it just was not aligning. Given how his life ended, like, it was quite shocking. Like, we finally can get some kind of insight as to what was going on in his head. And I think everyone was saying how he left in good spirits. Like, he was really regaining his strength. Even the artists that were working with him were saying, you know what, it felt like the start of something beautiful. So when he took this trip to Oman, it just felt like another trip. Like, he was just going to explore and find himself. And I think it's really crazy how sometimes productivity can mask depression. Because he was always working, people didn't think anything of it. They thought he was in the groove, when really he was using his work to mask his depression, to kind of mask how bad it was. And watching this documentary, I felt emotional. Like, again, if you're a fan of his, or if you've just connected with these songs, like, I know there's someone out there, there's no way Wake Me Up or Hey Brother, like, what are these songs must have been on repeat? Like, there has to be an Avicii song that does resonate with you in some way. Like, his music is so timeless that I just don't see how. And so watching this documentary, it kind of reminded me of why his music was so impactful and how he was able to connect. Something that he says that really struck out at me is not to be dismissive of something different. On paper, everything that he was doing was not supposed to work. It just didn't make sense for the genre. And yet it worked. And not only did it work, he just created these kind of instant classics. And I think so many of us are unable to live the life that we want to live because we're being pushed in different directions, whether it be with family, friends, work. Like, we're kind of split at all times. I think for Avicii, he was very fortunate in that music became his space to express himself in exactly the way that he wanted, without second guessing or having any doubts. Unfortunately, the same confidence did not extend to his personal life. One of the saddest moments in this documentary is when the artist Aloe Black says, when he listens back to SOS and his last album, he really wonders what was going through his mind because the lyrics hit a lot differently. I think this documentary did a really great job of humanizing this man and grounding him. I think he's such a great example of what can happen when you open up your heart and you always try to create from a place of honesty. And it's this honesty and this openness that made him so great. However, it's also what made him extremely vulnerable in this incredibly predatory industry that in the end just broke him down. And I think this is such a great watch. It feels like it's very well put together. And again, listening to him speak about his life, I think it adds a certain dimension to this documentary. And it's definitely worth watching. Like, personally, I'm a fan. And so for me, it hit differently. And so you guys let me know what you think, and until next time.